Dear friends, in Romania and beyond perhaps, with ROM. I was happy to be with ROM and participate at ROM in 2004, I believe, back in the days. And my name is Hermund Haaland, Hermund Haaland, in Norwegian, native of Bergen on the west coast. I've turned 45, have 3 kids, one sleeping outside right now, 15 months old, and the 2 others in kindergarten and school. Living in Tønsberg, just outside Oslo, with my wife Lynn and the kids. I'm very happy to know Camilla and Daniel and to collaborate and to talk to you today about entrepreneurial leadership. Let me tell you a little bit about myself briefly. So, growing up in a Christian family, I find myself very engaged in societal issues, reading the newspaper from early age. But as I got more and more engaged in church, I found myself in my teens really only engaged in church activities. And I struggled after a while to connect the 2 dots. What does church life and society look like in somewhat of a communion? What does it look like when my faith, my desire to follow Jesus and to love my neighbor as myself has an impact in society? What does that look like? And I'm not going to give you all the details. There's obviously lots of fun details, having lived for 45 years. But one highlight was spending 2 years in South Africa at a Bible school where I saw a church really making a difference, both in working with the poor, but also in working with political leaders to combat apartheid in the years prior to apartheid's fall back in '93. So it was a great experience for me to be in South Africa. So experiences like that have shaped me to the point where I'm at now. 10 years along the road where we've built a think tank, a Christian think tank in Norway, which has become one of the 4 more visible think tanks in the public debate. And it's really fun to see that we've been able to take the Christian values, but to frame them in a way that the secular environment understands those around us who have not grown up with the Bible and church. So let's dive into the topic of today, entrepreneurial leadership. I get inspired when I open the Bible on the first pages. I have to start there. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, it talks about us ruling the earth, that we take ownership to it, and that we become many and fruitful, and we fill the earth and we govern it. To me, that speaks about a willingness to take leadership. And that willingness has to be then connected to ability to lead. And throughout the Bible, we see people like Daniel and Esther and Joseph step up to that leadership in a secular setting, and we can find inspiration in those stories. But if we look to today, what does it mean to be an entrepreneurial leader, and why do I actually talk about an entrepreneurial leader? Well, I'll have to bring you back a little bit as well, because when I was 10, I started my first newspaper. We had 100 subscribers in the whole country of Norway, 1,000 in print, and made a little surplus. That was great fun. We did that for 2 years until I moved to Australia with my family for a while. And throughout my life, I've started things, and this entrepreneurial ability has popped up, and I got engaged in the entrepreneurial environment and saw, what does it take to build a business? What does that look like? And I wrote a couple of books. First, in 2016, Startup Europe, The Entrepreneurs Transforming Europe, where we looked at the ecosystems for entrepreneurs in cities like Berlin and Lisbon and London, Tallinn, Estonia, and found what can we learn from those cities that are able in Europe today to create platforms for new entrepreneurs. And then in 2017, we followed up with Startup Israel, as Israel has become one of the most innovative countries in the world. What can we learn from them? Why have they become so able to spin out new businesses and make money on new technology especially? Well, I thought entrepreneurship was mainly within the business world, but if we look back to the verse in Genesis, taking leadership of the world, the way I understand that verse and the biblical wisdom throughout the Bible, this is not only to take charge and to rule what's existing. It's actually also to structure and shape the world around us, our societies. And that's not just a leadership where we learn to lead existing organizations or lead to manage a lot of people in big corporations or manage people in existing organizations. It actually talks about structuring and shaping, which is an entrepreneurial ability. And I think as the world changes faster and faster, many existing companies and organizations are learning that they have to learn from the entrepreneurs. They have to pick up what kind of agility, what kind of other traits can they pick up from the entrepreneurial community to better create the change they need to do to respond to their markets and to respond to their environments. So I think, at least I'd like to set out with that definition, that an entrepreneurial leader is a leader that is able to shape his or her environment. And it's not just talking about the business sector, but it's also talking about politics, academia, even universities have to change these days. The health sector, the art sector, all sectors of society need entrepreneurial leaders who can shape the world into a better aligned to the needs of the people around us. And to use an example from politics, we see the rise of populism today. I think one of the reasons for that is that the existing parties in politics have not been able to answer the questions that the electorate have in a trustworthy way. So the electorate, people voting, will go to other people, other parties like the populists who claim to have better answers. I think existing parties need entrepreneurial leaders, entrepreneurial politicians who are able to change the way we do politics into the better, not to worse. So where do we go from here? Well, history is full of entrepreneurial leaders. I won't have time to go into it, but big innovations like the printing press and later, of course, the computer and now internet. These are huge innovations that have shifted the pace of life and created totally new environments for us as humans to live in. And some of them have been Christians, some have not. I think my stance would be that we as believers, we who aim to follow Jesus, we should be part of those good forces that create the common good, that shape society for the future, for the common good. We don't need to think we need to take the whole responsibility, but we have to be part of it. And when I wrote Startup Europe, I found that there were few believers in those environments where the entrepreneurs meet, those circles. We need to see more believers be part of those circles, to be part of the conversation on where and how do we lead into the future? How do we create the businesses and the organizations that can take us further? Because, or let me go step back a little bit and talk about two examples of this. One is a great example from Norway, from my country, where 200 years ago, this preacher boy, Hans Nilsen Hauge, who had been a small entrepreneur, and he was a farmer's boy, so he started a few businesses, small businesses in his teenage and student years or youth years, but he didn't really have a breakthrough until he had a huge encounter with God on a field outside his farm, his father's farm. He was pretty despondent. He hadn't succeeded. He had failed, like many entrepreneurs do. And in that state of somewhat of a depressed, not seeing the way forward, he had a strong encounter with Jesus that put him on fire. And to make the story short, there was a big revival, and lots of people turned to Jesus in Norway. But in the wake of it, his entrepreneurial abilities came to the front as well, because he realized the people are poor. That was a situation where a small elite ruled Norway and suppressed the majority. So he and his friends empowered the poor, the fishermen, the farmers. And I mean, they had starvation every second or third year. There was a drought, or there was a lack of fish from the fisheries. So they were in need, but he taught them how to start businesses, and he started more than 50 businesses himself, and more than 200 as a what we call today an investor or a business angel. It was incredible, and he and his friends at one point had 1% of the total investment in all private sector in Norway. This was between 1796 and 1804, so it was a very short period, but it had a huge impact. He was put in jail for 10 years and for other reasons, because he defied the church and the elite and some breaking some rules. Like there were some rules he couldn't travel to different municipalities without the police officers' stamp of approval. There were some strange rules suppressing the people, but he tried to keep them. But the elite, as they do today with opposition, they tried to put him in a corner and they jailed him. And anyway, historians in Norway say that movement, because it grew into a big movement where 200,000 people bought his books. He wrote books while he was walking. He wrote books, and his writing had a huge impact. So the whole early movement of democracy had its root in this first lay movement in Norway. So long story short, the historians say that one of two people that shaped Norway in the 19th century into modernity was Hans Nielsen Hauge. Incredible story. Another story, which isn't about a believer, but one of the 5 guys who shaped the formation of the European Union as we know it today. It started with the Coal and Steel Union. His name was Jean Monnet, a Frenchman. But out of the 5 most important guys behind the idea of the European Union, he was an entrepreneur. He came from the Cognac family, J.P. Monnet, and it was interesting to see how he, with his entrepreneurial ability, was able to connect the ideas of the thinkers in the group, where they came to the point where they actually had the ability to push forward the idea of the Coal and Steel Union in the early 50s. So just to prove that the entrepreneurial leader is needed in other sectors than business. So Hans Nielsen Hauge and his movement started businesses, but he also influenced the startup of new political parties and NGOs and schools and his hospitals in Norway. So this entrepreneurial ability is needed throughout all society. And that was the point I wanted to make. So where do you go from here? Well, today we have huge challenges. Until Corona, we had an improvement of the state of health in the whole world. The people living on $1 declined slowly. We had less people dying of malnutrition or lack of vaccines. And you know the stats about this. The world got a little bit better. At the same time, we had more wars, the Syrian war being one example. So it wasn't like bliss. But in some ways, the world was improving. Yet we see increased polarized politics where the established parties are losing ground, and their lack of trust in a population, and you see this in Europe as much as in the United States, is kind of shaping away the very ground the political institutions are based upon. And I'm personally worried about the state of your democracy in the West. If we look 10 years from now, it could get worse. We could have less trust and more polarization even than we have today, and at the worst price we would have to pay with wars. So politics is one area, and then the chronic unemployment among young people in many countries in Southern Europe, in Eastern Europe, even in some parts of Western Europe, the youth unemployment rates are too high, way too high. So that's an obvious. We need to create the new jobs, and this is in a situation where the robots will come and take away some of the jobs that we have today. How do we deal with that? Well, we need to create the new jobs. I don't know how to do it, but we need to create them. Climate is an obvious one. We are fighting against time to save our planet and to save the future of our kids. I mean, there will be a future, but the question is, how warm will that future be? We want to keep it as nice as possible. So that's an obvious one. We have migration, which is connected to climate. We probably will have an influx of people from Africa and other parts of the world into Europe because we do have a stronger welfare state for now. So we don't know where this will lead to, but I think it's pretty fair to say that we have some huge challenges that we didn't know about 10 or 20 years ago growing up. So who are to fix those? Do we lean on Trump or Boris Johnson or the leadership of the United European Union? Do we lean on our national politicians? Or do we take responsibility ourselves? Not to say that we will rise up to be the new revolutionary leaders, but my challenge is we need to be part of the solution. We need to work with all good forces and step up. And that's a question of two abilities, I would say. One is courage. We need to encourage each other to have the courage to stand up and to take leadership. And we need to have ability. And you guys are as skilled as me with education to use that for good. And one key and crucial lesson to learn from, for example, Hans Nielsen Hauge and his friends, and any entrepreneur throughout history, is that they were able to create solutions with a bad start. I mean, they were poor, they had nothing, but they found, thinking entrepreneurially about their issues, they found solutions that actually then created money and wealth for them to have more impact. I think there is, whatever challenges we face, there is always a way forward. There's always a way forward. We face difficulties. I've personally had a couple of burnouts and health issues, but there's always a way forward. There's always a way to come back, if not stronger, then at least still able to contribute and to create. So I would like to encourage you to help each other to create, to stir that ability to create and create something new, despite the circumstances, despite corruption or despite hindrances in the government. There are always ways to create something good out of nothing. And it takes a couple of friends, starting a business, starting a party, starting an organization, joining one. And obviously there are different differences. I mean, in Norway, it's so much easier to have political influence by engaging in a party or starting a new one than, for example, in the United States, where you have to have money and you need a lot more resources to engage politically. So for the most in Europe, it's pretty easy to engage in politics, for example. So the question is, how do we help one another to think about the solutions and the problems of our societies, both locally and globally, and how do we help each other be part of the solution to create the solutions, to create the answers? And let me end off with this thought then. I read a great writer, a professor of theology from Regent University in Vancouver in Canada. His name is Stephen Garber, and he had a fantastic definition of vocation. Now, vocation comes from the Latin vocatione, you could probably pronounce it better, but the idea of a vocation, a calling from God, even not just in church work, but in a secular setting, which also Martin Luther in the Reformation was highly focused on and brought into the theology. He says, Stephen Garber says, you would find your vocation, your calling, when you look at your abilities on the one side and the needs in society on the other. So I would say, if you wonder about what is my role in this, what is my role in shaping the society of tomorrow? Well, look at your abilities. Are you good at computing? Are you good at caring for people? Well, find out what are the strengths, your strongest points of strength, of talents. And then think about what motivates you most to make a difference. Is it to take care of the poor? Is it to fix politics and corruption? Is it to create jobs for more of your co-students who don't have that ability? Well, if you find out what you're good at with what you're motivated to do, then you would find your vocation. I agree with Stephen Garber. And I encourage you to keep on pressing on to find your vocation. What is your calling? It might cost. You might have to take a risk. You might not have the money for years. I interviewed one entrepreneur in Portugal, in Lisbon. He had to bootstrap, like many entrepreneurs. He had to take another job, 50%, while he started his dream business that eventually grew and he could live off it. Many entrepreneurs, most, have to bootstrap for a while. Find out your calling. Find out what you're motivated to do. Work together as friends, as a community of friends, to dream and think and act to be part of the solution. Be an entrepreneurial leader. And one idea, if I put that in at the very last minute, would be to learn from the entrepreneurial circles. In every country, in your country, there are entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs or others. Find out how you can join events in their entrepreneurial circles and learn from their ability to think fresh, think in new ways, and act on it. And then bring that knowledge and learn from them to the sector of society you want to be part of. And I think you will see that even God will be with you to support you in that endeavor to improve the state of the world. We need it. We need to help each other to succeed. Should you want to get these books, I have them on PDFs as well. So get in touch with Camilla and the Rom Leadership, and they will forward it to me, and I will. I don't want to give it away because that's not always as smart. I want you to really want to read this and to get the knowledge. So you can. Usually we take 20 euros or something from each, but if you pay €5, I'll send you both PDFs of Startup Europe, The Entrepreneurs Transforming Europe, Get Inspired by Those Who Have Done It, and Startup Israel, Argument Breeds Innovation. There's something very cool in the Jewish culture that they have learned to argue to bring up a culture of thinking fresh thoughts. You'll be inspired. Thank you once again for having me, and I hope you have a great time discussing the questions I prepared for you. Thank you.